Hello and welcome. I'm Ronnie Gilbert, Director of Events here at the Mechanics Institute. And we thank you for joining us here for our program with Paul Madonna, author of The Commissions, in conversation with Gary Kamiya, author of Cool Gray City of Love, 49 Views of San Francisco. Paul and Gary are friends and collaborators, and they are co-authors of Spirits of San Francisco, Voyages to the Unknown City. And we are just thrilled to have them both back here after a long hiatus. So please welcome back Gary Kamiya and Paul Madonna. For those of you who are new to Mechanics Institute, of course, we were founded in 1854, and we're one of San Francisco's most vital literary and cultural centers in the heart of the city. We feature our general interest library on the second and third floors, our international chess club, which is right down the hallway, and our ongoing literary programs and our cinema lit film series and many different classes and courses that are going on 24/7, just about 7 days a week. So please visit our website. And if you are new and have never been through our building, please come on Wednesday at noon for the free tour, and our librarians will give you a wonderful historical background and also show you through the collection and through the building. So please join us, free tour on Wednesday. After our conversation, we'll engage you, our audience, for Q&A, and also books will be on sale, and our two authors will be here to sign. So I'd like to introduce our guests, and of course, we're really pleased to welcome back Paul for his new Emit Hopper mystery, which is The Commissions, which kicks off the origin story. And promises to be a wonderful new introduction to the eccentric detective Ronnie Gilbert. And also he brings his very unique drawings and writing together in this new edition. Paul Madonna is an award-winning artist and best-selling author whose unique blend of drawing and storytelling has been heralded as an all-new art form. His series, All Over Coffee, ran in the San Francisco Chronicle for 12 years, 2003 to 2015. And his book, Everything is Its Own Reward, won 2011 Northern California Book Award for Best Book. Paul's work ranges from novels to cartoons to large-scale public murals and can be found internationally in print as well as in galleries and museums. He is also the founding editor of therumpus.net. He has taught drawing at the University of San Francisco and frequently lectures on creative practice. He holds a BFA from Carnegie Mellon University, and just another anecdote, he was the first art intern at Mad magazine. Who would have known? Paul resides in San Francisco. He does take commissions and also travels the world to do his drawing and writing. And Gary Kamiya is the author, journalist, and historian of San Francisco. And his 2013 book, Cool Gray City of Love, which I mentioned before, was a runaway bestseller and also won the 2013 Northern California Book Award for Creative Nonfiction. His latest book, the collaboration that he did with Paul, which was published in 2020, Spirits of San Francisco, Voyages to the Unknown City, will also be on sale today. It features 16 of Paul's superb drawings of the wildly eclectic sites that both Paul and Gary have chosen together. Gary's award-winning history column, Portals of the Past, appeared for more than 10 years in the San Francisco Chronicle and also in the San Francisco Examiner. Gary has hosted and has been featured prominently as an expert on-camera source in many documentaries, including such critically acclaimed works as Citizen First, a two-part, 4-hour PBS documentary about William Randolph Hearst, Moving San Francisco, about the history of transportation in San Francisco, and Water from the Wilderness, about the epic creation of the Hetchy water system. And Gary is also available as a speaker and gives unique San Francisco walking tours by reservation. So once again, welcome our guests, Gary Kamiya and Paul Madonna.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that generous introduction. And I'm just delighted to be here with my good friend and longtime collaborator, Paul Madonna. Delighted to be celebrating this marvelous new novel, The Commissions, which is really an extraordinary achievement. And before we go any further, because this will come up in the course of our discussion, I have to admit to my embarrassment that over my lengthy during my lengthy collaboration and long collaboration with Paul, I had never actually read his explicit fiction. I'd never read his novels. I'd read all over coffee, those wonderfully gnomic kind of haiku-like cartoons, which have words, have prose. But I'd never read the novels. And I was quite, as I told Paul, I wasn't surprised at how good it was because I know how talented Paul is. But I was surprised because it was so damn good and because writing fiction is so damn hard. And this is not the efforts of an amateur who's really an artist. This is really the work of a writer, of a very accomplished writer with a lot of unique skills. So it was really great pleasure to read that book. And before we get into the commitments and all the other stuff we're going to talk about today, I thought I would just ask Paul to talk about something that probably all of you know happened to Paul almost exactly a year ago. He had a horrendous accident. He was involved in a horrendous accident when a hit-and-run driver ran head-on, going very fast into his smart car. He's really lucky to be alive. It was a very long recuperation, very traumatic. And Paul, why don't you just tell our listeners and our people in the room about that experience?
Are we on now? Okay. First of all, thanks, Gary, for the props on writing, because it's one thing when a stranger tells you you've done a good job, but it's another thing when somebody you respect highly tells you you've done a good job. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, the accident, I guess we're just getting that out of the way, aren't we? We're just a few days away from the 1-year anniversary, so it's on Monday, which I generally am not one for anniversaries. They don't like my birthdays. My friends don't even know what my birthday is. But this one it feels significant. I don't know what else to say except it was terrible. And I was bedridden for 5 months, getting up to move about very little. But interestingly, this book is the thing that I did to see me through it. I keep saying about it that it's not a book about recovery, but it is the book I used to get me through that recovery. It was about 2 months from going to prison when the accident happened, and when you know my work, you know that it's the way the images and the story go together are an integral part of the book. So I had a last edit to do, like sort of that final story edit, and then we had a copy edit to do. And then I had the final layout, because once we had the final text, I could really finalize the drawings. And so I did all of that from the equivalent of the hospital bed. And I had set my sights in January, and this happened in November. So in January, I told myself I'm still going to meet my September update, and whether I'm wheeled in or I can walk in, I'm going to reemerge in September. And so, and that's what I did. And so for me, if like anybody who doesn't know what happened, I didn't miss a beat because of my television schedule. And that to me, it's like, it's how you come back to life.
Yeah.
I also talk with my hands, so, using a microphone is a challenging thing.
Besides the simple fact of having a goal that you can aim at when you're going through this really painful, long recovery process, was there something else about the creative process of doing creative work when you're going through this physical trauma that was also, helpful or interesting in your recovery?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think that had the book been not as far along, I don't know that I would have been able to do it, because the creative work, it wasn't as available to me. Some of it I was just so medicated that there's no romance in deep opiates. And so, if I had to solve plot problems, I wouldn't have been able to do that, I think. And so everything was in place, the structure was in place. I did some refining, and I did a little bit of rewriting, but I think if I'd only been halfway through the book, I might not have been able to do it. So that was interesting. It was also interesting coming out of, as I was able to get back into the studio, I found that certain things weren't available to me immediately. And this, I say this in just a very objective way. It made me understand sort of the high level of work that I do, and that's not to put my work on a pedestal. It's just to say I had sort of taken for granted maybe what I've been doing for years and years, and then when I couldn't just go to it, when I couldn't just write a novel or even stretch towards paper to be able to do a drawing, I realized how much I needed to function and how far I had come in order to get back to that. So I was really glad that the book was in a place that was just about the craft, really, of finishing an object, the business in a way of a book, right? The editing, the layout, stuff that I could do for bed and then I could do for half an hour and then lose all my energy, sleep for 4 hours, get up, or wake up, and do it for half an hour again and feel like that total of an hour was actually an accomplishment for today.
Yeah. Well, it's a marvelously convoluted plot with these fascinating characters, one of whom is this San Francisco former detective, Ronnie Gilbert, who appears in an earlier book of yours. And it's interesting, Paul's fictional trajectory with his 3 books is quite unusual, and maybe you'd like to talk about how this book fits together with your 2 previous novels.
Yeah, Close Enough for the Angels was the first Emit book, and it was meant to be a one-off. I couldn't anticipate that I would be doing more. And I cut my teeth with that book, I think. I made a lot of mistakes, and I wrote myself into a lot of plot corners, which I hadn't realized until after doing it, and I realized that I had another book in me, or that Emit had another book. It was like the last draft, and I was walking down the street, and I just had this flash of Emit in a Roman plaza, and I knew that it was years after the end of Close Enough for the Angels, and I thought, oh, yeah, it'll be. I know that there's another story after this, and I actually changed the ending like at the last minute to set it up. Then when I was writing Come to Light, I realized I'd written myself into all these corners. So I used that book in a lot of ways to undo those corners. And I think that was my education really as a novelist, because that's when I became a world building. And I really thought not just beyond the story, but what was his life in times that we're not hearing about, so that I could have that in mind when I was thinking about him and when I was writing him.
Oh, Emit.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of like, not cliches, adages that I like for writing, and one of them is that you should never rely on a review to carry you along. You know, if your last turn, if you give something away, like, I'm not big on spoilers, we shouldn't give everything away, but if one of the beautiful things about a great story, a great movie, a great book is watching it again, reading it again, and reading it for how it was done, and the things that you missed. And that to me is when you have a really good story, when you want to go back and engage with it again. And so one of the adages I like is you move the end to the beginning. You know, if you've got this big reveal, then don't wait to page 300. Just try to do it on page 1 and then see what happens. But I say this because, you know, talking about Ronnie Gilbert, I introduced him at the end of Delay. He's really a very minor character, and I killed him. Like, he dies in the story. And giving that away seems like, you should do that. But it doesn't spoil anything. And this book actually opens with the trial of the person who supposedly killed Ronnie. And so this allows Emit to go back and tell the story of when they first meet. And I like that as a device, and as a way to give backstory for new characters, instead of reading up from more stories, and at the same time not have any big secrets in the way for the review.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about not hanging the whole novel on a reveal, which I think yours means, but it's also very intricately plotted. It makes extensive uses of flash forwards and flashbacks and all kinds of red herrings and misleading pieces of information, and the reader is led down all kinds of weird and dark rabbit holes, some of which turn out to be completely misleading. And I'm just wondering, when you plot out a book like this, do you pretty much have a game plan, the entire sort of intricate Chinese box construction of a book like this? Do you sort of make a battle plan and then write out the whole plot, or is there a certain amount of making it up as you're writing it, as you go along?
It's a mixture of both, because I think that if it were intricately plotted to start with, I would get bored with the writing. It would feel really mechanical, right? Like, oh, now I have to write scene 12 and this happens, and there's no room for discovery. And it did take me a few books to figure out how to do this, and not that like I'm an expert at it now, but I see it as you just figure out what the main points are. It's sort of like I need to get from A to Z, but I just need to plan D, M, and R, right? And as long as I hit those years, and everything else sort of becomes a microcosm where you do the same thing, right? Like it's about turns, how you get there and take the reader in one direction and then turn them around and surprise them. But then as long as you end up at that major plot point that you hit, then you're supposed to end. And then you're doing fine. But what happens after that is shaping, right? Because sometimes the book is way too long on getting from like that second plot point and not enough. And so then it's pulling things out, reshaping, maybe filling in. And I like that sort of constant going in and reshaping and discovering. And sometimes it does change. Like we have a couple, I think, really interesting characters in this book. One, Martin Zorn, right? Like he's an ambiguous moral character, and that's sort of the heart of it. And teasing out that ambiguity of morality is about kind of taking the reader to one place of thinking about him, and then backing off and taking him somewhere else. And doing that enough times, he created this world where he is complex. And I think to do that just goes through, it's almost like reading it through over and over again.
When, Martin Zorn, we won't do any giveaways on this extremely complicated, interesting character, but it's he's very hot, he's a very morally ambiguous figure. Did you find your own feelings about him changing constantly as you wrote the book, or do you feel like you had a sense of what this guy's weird mixture was, or was it sort of an unstable mixture in your imagination that kept shifting around?
I wanted it to be somewhere where you couldn't land on absolute villain. You know, and I'm sure you know this, anybody who works in writing knows this, is that when you create these black and white characters of hero and villain, they won't ring true. And also, there are very few, there are evil deeds, but the idea of evil character is, because often characters, they're acting out of what they believe is good, right? Like they have their reasoning and their justification, and that they might even believe that they're making the world a better place by other people who are deemed as evil deeds, right? So they finding that, I think, takes time, and I just, it's a nod to noir as well, of the ambiguity of and sort of the complexity of, you do good only to end up doing bad and vice versa, and maybe misunderstanding. I like the idea of a character sort of getting lost in time and washing themselves up and not even knowing whether they did enough good or not.
You invoked noir, and I'm wondering if you read some of the classic hard-boiled detective fiction, obviously Hammett, and Raymond Chandler, and other great, James Elmo and contemporary. Was that kind of work something that was important to you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple elements. One is stylistically in terms of sentences, right? That is sort of punchiness. But I think you have to be careful. Like a lot of there's the original hard-boiled, and then there's everything that came after that was sort of mimicry and
Mickey's flying.
and it's easy for those to really feel cheap,
Right.
by just using these punchy sentences or these offhanded comments. So I wanted to I did some of that with Ronnie, right? Like Ronnie is that punchy character.
Right.
But in a contemporary sense, but the rest of the book it's written simply, but it's not written in that style. It's more the ambiguity about, but the plot, I mean, we do have resolution. It's not like we end up going right. It's more just creating the complexity of character.
Yeah. Well, let's move the focus a little bit larger, just to talk about how you got interested in writing to begin with, because I think most of us know you primarily as a plastic artist, a visual artist. We know that you've written books, but obviously you had a great love of writing and passion and interest in writing that goes back before these books. So maybe you can talk about how, that was the sort of genesis of your interest in writing.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, is when you get known for one thing, it's hard to be seen as anything else, right? And it's sort of.
And if you saw my art, you would think there's good reason for that.
It makes me think about Henry Miller always trying to pawn off his watercolors and everybody.
They weren't that bad.
No, he called it that. Like, I like Miller's watercolors, but he was always trying to make a buck, right? Like, people would show up in Big Sur to like be Henry Miller and he'd like my watercolor. So, maybe I'm like, hey, you show us my drawing from your story. So my interest was always in combining them. Like I loved cartoons, and but cartooning is a really hard form. I think it's assumed that it's simple because of how reduced it is as a form, but it takes a long time to get something reduced. And I was, I had more skills, I think, as a draftsman than that. So I was interested in painting. I entered college as a oil painter, but I was also writing plays. So I was interested in how do you combine those things. And there's really no art form that necessarily did it. And even in a mix of traditional education and postmodern education, there was very little for storytelling. It might have been for language, right? The simplicity of words, like and that that can be used. But I think I understood that as much as I loved drawing and painting, stories were the bigger art form. They were the human art form. And that in a way, everything else could work in service of that. And I think too that stories are, being a storyteller is being different than being a writer. Because when one writes, they don't necessarily set out to write stories, right? They can write any number of things, for any number of reasons. But when you set out to tell a story, I think you're doing something that calls to mind a lot of tradition of just passing on information and passing on wisdom, right? And fiction has to have a little bit of that. It has to have some turns. And so those were the things I was interested in, but how do you get there, right? That's the abstract part of it. So I think I spent a lot of my young life just figuring out how do I write plays and paint pictures, and it took me a long time to do them merged together. So All Over Coffee, I get asked all the time, like, how do you go from All Over Coffee to writing novels with the drawings? And to me, they're so similar. It's just, I just sort of tweaked the form instead of short form, and now it's long form. But they're still working together in a similar way for me.
When you were working on writing plays, were you doing that with the idea that you would be doing like sets that would be, you would draw, so you would sort of like, what they call it, it's complete work of art with the, the art and the words and the dramaturgy, all that, Paul Madonna. Was that like your vision of why you went into theater?
I don't know that I had the complete vision. I liked collaborating. Collaborated with a lot of musicians and directors and actors in college to do performances because I had people who were writing either plays or music and being able to put them on, right? Because that was their department, that's where they were. And so then I would contribute visuals, be it projections or make things up for stage sets or just try to do something interesting. I did a lot of sort of where I didn't do the performance, but somebody else did. I think it was just trying out ideas. I don't know that I repeated any of them. It's like, oh, let's do this one, then you do another one. And it's interesting that I gravitated towards performance because it seemed like there was no other place, but it was also, that was the community that was most accepting of it, I found. Like the arts and writing community, at least we're talking university environment, we're very much about just doing those things, right? But the theater was more, yeah, sure, let's try that. That sounds really cool, welcome, and it's more inviting. And I think that sort of collaborative and communal part of it was what I needed because I was looking for a place where I didn't feel like I lived in a place.
Yeah, and as a painter, as a person who makes drawings, it's hard to collaborate. I mean, it's that must have been really, and you've been able to have some collaborative work, including with me,
Right.
Which is super fun. Maybe you talk about how that feels compared to just being in the studio by yourself.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the in service of, right? That you're I'm making a drawing not as just a standalone drawing, but in service of this story or in service of this project. Like, I've been doing, well, when I did All Over Coffee, I did not want to do a series anymore. I did basically 4 days a week for 2 years, and then I did weekly for 10 years. And I was so done with having that regular, just like buttons to push. And so I took some time off, but the non-public exec called me and they offered me a monthly. I was like, all right, well, I've never done a monthly, so I'll try that. And I was doing so, I tried to do something very different than I had done with All Over Coffee, and I found that I wasn't enjoying it. And that's when, so I'm just giving you a bunch of random information that people know. You had requested I work on Cold Gray City Club, right? And Blueberry got in touch with me and they wouldn't tell me what the book was and had me sign an NDA and all this stuff. And they sent it to me and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. And yeah, I want to do it. And I think they were taking like 6 weeks to do all the drawings.
49 drawings.
Yeah, and there was no way. I mean, I was doing weekly and I think I was writing a novel at the time and I was like, there's no way I can do this. I couldn't do it if I had nothing else to do. And so I had to pass on the project, but I always felt bad because I didn't want you to think that I did my book, and I think we actually met at the book awards.
Right.
And so we agreed that night that we would do something together, that we would start from scratch instead of like one of us bringing on the project. And so when I had this monthly available to me, and I scrapped what I was doing, and I called you up, and I was like, let's do an A/B, like let's do something you contribute, I contribute, and let it figure itself out. And that's why I think it's in service, right? We showed up together as a partnership, and I think that's so interesting about Spirits because there were stories that you found, and there were drawings that I made that we wouldn't have done otherwise if not for the others.
Right.
And that was one of those people that I have to go out and say like, oh, I'm gonna find the beauty in this thing because Gary has this cool story about it, and I might have passed it over otherwise, and vice versa. And I think giving that to a reader is totally different than other history books are giving.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of relationship between writer and artist in Spirits was much more radically egalitarian than is the usual relationship between a writer and an illustrator. I mean, the very word illustrator already places that person in a certain way of subsidiary position. And we knew from the beginning this was going to be a completely co-equal thing, which made it really fun in terms of even all of the research for the sites. We both had to sign off on it. It wasn't like I would say, well, I found this amazing story. And in fact, we did actually history. I said, I found this amazing story. And I got all excited. Paul, go out and look at this incredible Caselli mansion, the Nobby Clark's Folly on Caselli Street. It's like the greatest Victorian. You're going to love it. It'll be an amazing drawing. Paul comes back and kind of says briefly, Gary, I can't do it. And I said, why not? You can explain why.
Well, there was, the sun never hit. And so there was, and I'm like, without, like, light shadow are so important, or so much important part of my drawings, formally, that if I couldn't get any sunlight on it, I was like, oh, can't do it justice. It was a beautiful building. I love to draw it. I mean, aside from sleeping on the grounds, we have done, we've gotten chased off of places, out of places, sort of surrounded by teachers and escorted out.
It's good to be old. You don't get immediately arrested. I'm speaking for myself. Probably you.
Yeah, so and there were ones that you passed on too. But I think there were also ones that excited us both. Like I remember sending you, I think it was the Whittier Mansion, because I drove by it all the time. I was like, I always wanted to draw that building. And what I loved is that I could send you the address. You said, yeah, I think I know about that. And then a day later, you're like, oh, we have to do a piece on this. And this is a nice dovetail into this book too, which is like, then I got to learn something about these sites. And with All Over Coffee, I was bringing such a really like romantic or really abstract view. Like it had nothing to do with the history of the place. It had nothing to do with anything that happened in a building that I was trying. Whereas we were doing the total opposite. I got to learn, and I think approach the drawings maybe a little differently because of that.
Yeah, I think one of your anecdotes from the All Over Coffee days, you said that you saw a whole bunch of people looking at something, you turn around and look at the opposite direction.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's what you were drawing.
Exactly, like when you look through those books, there's like, I think I drew the bridge twice, and that might be the most iconic thing.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of like anonymous street corners with a lot of really interesting telephone lines.
Exactly.
One of the reasons I think Paul and I hit it off immediately. I love that stuff, and I'm trying to find the historical equivalent of those telephone lines. And so I think we were kind of a match made in heaven in terms of our sense of looking that way. But I will say that, yeah, there were a couple times with things, sites that you chose, and then I kind of said, okay, I'll do it. And then it was really scary because it was like, can I find something to write about this? And the one that was the scariest was that rock house. There was this amazing building on Potrero Hill, which sits on this huge extruded slab of serpentinite. That's like a full block long, and it's pretty amazing. But I knew nothing about this building. You'd gone by it all the time because it was near your old studio. And so I was kind of sweating bullets because I was like, I have a chapter that was like, this building sits on a large piece of rock. Yeah.
That's why they call it the rock.
But I did manage to, that one I got really lucky because it turned out it had a wildly complicated and interesting tale. So I think, as you were saying, one of the things that was interesting was I think the collaboration actually moved both of us into areas that we otherwise wouldn't have gone into at all. I would have probably, who knows if I would have ever done anything on that building. And, you maybe wouldn't have known about, the earthquake subsidence houses on Shady Street.
Oh, man, those were great.
Yeah,
Fun to draw.
yeah, absolutely.
And then the drawings took on a different approach too, because I began to think of them more as portraits, building portraits, or because now we have a subject matter that is really clearly being presented, right? Instead of more of an aesthetic. I mean, I still wanted to compose the page and have it have the formal elements that I enjoy bringing to me that made a good drawing in my eyes, but we had a different focus. And so that was sort of refreshing too, because even though the drawing style is the same, I needed some shift in terms of at least my own eye and my own practice from all of the copy. And I think that that's important, that it feels like it has some distinction, so it's not just interchangeable from book to book.
Yeah, and one of the fascinating things that I was noticing when reading the commissions, which is just chock full of Paul's wonderful drawings of all different types, including very sketchy line drawings like the kind that when we got kicked out of Pier 70, we were, Paul goes and looks at a site and he'll do a sketch that's very broad, and then he takes reference photographs. And there's a couple of those that are actually very close to the opening of this book. But it was fascinating for me because after we did this book, we just mutually decided, that was probably a one-off for us in terms of this type of collaboration. So there were a number of pieces that Paul had done for the Novel Gazette column with me that never appeared in this book, and some other pieces as well that he drew. And a number of those pieces appear wonderfully in this book, including, the ones that I wrote more historical write-ups on. And for me, it was really fascinating, sort of aesthetically, to be looking at something that was serving this completely different function in a journalistic, historical context. And all of a sudden, it's in a novel context. And one of the things that really interests me about Paul's novels, and this novel in particular, is that the art plays a lot of different aesthetic roles, and it's kind of ambiguous. There's this sort of theme that the book's called Commissions, which means that sort of covers a lot of art in the book, because it's a meta conceit. The narrator is an artist, and these are drawings by the narrator, and he was commissioned by people. Some of them actual real people. But then there's, but some of them like serve as establishing shots, they serve as illustrations of the story. Maybe you can talk about the sort of interesting varied nature of how the art functions in the book.
Yeah, well, this type of book, it's going back to the classic illustrated novel. But one of the things that I dislike about that form, and that I think is why it's fallen out of favor, is because the way it's set up is that images are redundant. Like the classic illustrated novel was begun by publishers who had a really successful book, and because they wanted to capitalize on that, they would then commission illustrators to make drawings. So the work was already set. There was no space in the story for an image. Those images were being made based on that read on page 12 that there's a romantic dinner on Sunset in Paris, and you turn the page on 13 and you'd see a drawing of like a table and candlelight and the Eiffel Tower in the background, right? It's sort of echoing what is already in the prose. And I think that we don't need that. The one beautiful things about reading is that it excites the mind, the imagination. We all create a version of the story that we're reading, and it becomes very personal. And so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just to serve a different role. So, my protagonist is an artist. He's out there, he's commissioned to do these drawings. And so it's very overt why he's out doing them. And we get to read part of the story and know that he's out there doing these things. So we see what he's seeing, but we're reading something else, so there's no redundancy. But you're right, I do, with this book, I take a little bit more liberty. I wanted to enter us in a cinematic way. So the first two drawings are, I consider, establishing shots. The wide shot, and then we do the close-up. And it's just a way to bring the reader in. And, just start with this long shot of San
So
Francisco.
this one is like the scene of the city from the waterfront, which is very much an establishing shot. And then this is a closer establishing shot of the Midori Hotel in the Tenderloin, where a lot of the action, the dark action of the book takes place.
Yeah, so
So those are more traditional, in the style that you didn't necessarily want to stay with, but you
Right.
used it in those places.
I use it very much of green setting, and I just, that's sort of the cinematography approach. But then I quickly abandoned that, we don't need that anymore. But I think that it sets the viewer in the place of, oh, I'm looking at locations. Because they are all real locations, and because our protagonist does go to these locations and draw them, I'm continually putting you back in that driver's seat. But to talk about spirits and the overlap is, we agreed to do one book, and we kind of set out to just do the series with said until we had enough pieces for a book, and that's what we were going to do. But it was so successful, we decided to stay on, and they gave us more money. And we were enjoying it, so we decided to stay on. But then at a certain point, I was writing this, and I thought, oh well, I can do some of the drawings because I'm doing like line street steps, right? I'm going to set a scene there, and we were talking about this piece. And so we talked about whether we were going to do another book. And you had other projects, side projects, so we agreed to be working. And then I thought, well, okay, I can do things that will. I can do a drawing and serve two purposes. So I began bringing, I was like, hey, I want to do the scene, and I did the commissions for this. You want to do it? So it was a nice way to sort of think locally. And but it had to be agreed to do another series without making that.
Right, and as a working writer, I'm all for multi-purpose things. So I was delighted you were able to use that work and use it in such a great way. And yeah, that's one of the sort of interesting aesthetic multi-valences, if you will, of the art is that some of it, like there'll be a drawing of like a screen in Amsterdam. There's a scene in Amsterdam, and it's not quite an establishing cinematic shot like those ones we look at. It's a little bit like that. It's also more like, here's Amsterdam. And it just takes you as the reader to say, I'm in Amsterdam, and I get this really beautiful drawing in Amsterdam that may not even directly relate to the scene. And then there's other drawings that don't have anything to do with anything in particular, and then it's like, oh, I'm just looking at art. The fact that it floats around like that, I think is really nice and odd and kind of unique. I mean, I can't think of another book where the art that's done by the writer sort of occupies these different funny relationships in the text in that way.
Yeah, and relationship, I think, is the right word, and that's, we go back to what I was talking about being a young person and wanting to do these two seemingly disparate practices and saying, I want to combine them. Right. So it's been sort of just years of practicing, saying, well, what if we put them together in this way? What happens? And adjust this and tweak this, and finding different ways that those two can have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, we're getting towards the end of our time here, but let me just close by asking you what is next in the career of Emit Hopper, of the late but still kicking and with many stories to be told, Ronnie Gilbert, and other characters that you really like in this book.
Well, the goal with this book, I was going to do two more with Ronnie, because basically there's a 20-year period between when Emit and Ronnie meet and when we know that Ronnie dies. So, we're told that he's had a very illustrious career. So I love the idea that I could have these windows just open and I could write stories, and they could be episodic. right? Like, that's what I'm trying to do with the series as well. You can enter it in any book. And there would be nods and sort of cues, and that's part of the world building, is knowing that now I leave these spaces that then I can go off on a tangent and write an entire novel that doesn't conflict with anything else.
Right.
So yeah, more Ronnie.
Or so, do you have like 2 more books in the immediate pipeline? Do you have an actual number? Do you have ideas of where this is going?
Well, no, I have general overviews of plots of three books.
Okay.
But there is another character, I know we're wrapping up, but and she has a 3-story arc, so I imagine those two having together in 2 more books.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to those. Paul is an irritatingly multi-talented man. But it's delighted to be your pal and to be working with you, and I hope sure we'll work together again. So congrats on the book, and we'll open it up to questions from the floor.
Well, I was just going to ask, Paul, if you'd like to do a short reading from the commissions, we'd love to hear. Short something.
It should have been terrible to read. I know, there's no way for me to give context.
All right. In that case, we're all gonna have to buy a book.
What do you do here?
But in the meantime, who's got a question? I'll be coming around with a microphone, coming your way.
So great to hear from you. So did Spirits 2020, did it miss making, it was COVID, you know, I've never heard of this book.
Yeah, it actually was very successful, and we were lucky because when it came out, there was just enough time to kind of stop the presses, and I wrote the preface, and I wrote about San Francisco under COVID. So it was, this very intense take, kind of a weirdly positive one on how strange and beautiful the deserted city was. And so, some of what I wrote has, it's a testament of the time. There were things that I predicted or said that did not exactly continue to be true, but it was written at that point in time. So it's nice when you have a book that's timely, like in a crisis moment like that we were able to actually not only write the largely historical, vignettes, but also tie it in. But to your question about not having heard about it, I think actually I heard kind of the opposite from a lot of people, that because many people, as I'm sure many of you did, went out and walked a lot. It became clear very early on that was safe. And so a lot of people were walking, and a lot of people would come up and say, "Oh man, I read Paul's book, and I just went to the Joyce Street steps, and I did this," and it was actually a positive thing for people in that really that dark time, especially at the beginning.
I have a quick question about your artwork, Paul, in terms of, I think it was it close enough for angels? We had the exhibit at the gallery, the first book. So when you're doing your artwork, is it large scale or is it small scale, or are these drawings from the commissions also large gallery size pieces of art?
Yeah, a lot of them are sort of maybe 12 by 16-ish, with Angels, I did all of those drawings straight to ink on site, and I didn't finish them all on site. So that was so laborious because that book takes place across Asia. I think I did 4 trips and I started 170 drawings, and then I finished 100 drawings, and it was over years. And so when I said come to light in Europe, I was like, I'm not traveling with a suitcase full of watercolor blocks and doing all that again. So I started a new process of sketching, but what that allowed me to do was do larger pieces when I came back. So some of the drawings are 4 by 5 feet, the smallest is maybe 12 by 16. But so yeah, they have a big range, and it allows me to do different things with them as well. And always, there's that sort of wanting something to serve multiple purposes. So I never really work for print. I work to make an object that is beautiful as an object, and then it gets documented, and I might be printing it. But it's really different than when we see a piece of work that's made, and you see it's marked up or corrected in a way that those disappear or they're corrected when it goes to print. But and then that might have some beauty in itself. But I think coming from a world of fine art, I always think about the wall first.
Here's some questions. Anyone else? Where we put the hand over here?
I'm so happy to be here this evening. I admire you both and your work so much. Here's a question for you. The confession is I've not read either of your prior novels. Do you have a recommendation about, now that this one takes place actually 20 years prior to the others, do you have a recommendation about the right order to read these novels?
I think it's a standard thing that the author always thinks the newest is the best. I think that I would start with this because it's so standalone, and this book knows the world of Emit so much more than the other two do, that it allows the space for those. So I think it's a great way to enter into his character, his voice, and understand and like how he functions. So yeah, it's not just it's the newest one, but I really do think that it's the best way.
Question coming over here. It's on.
Hello. I have a question about the Caselli Mansion.
Yes.
Did you ever think, or did you actually try looking at it in the depths of winter and summer to see if some shadows might appear?
That's a great question. I'm not to that building specifically, but I have in the past chosen sites as just an exercise that I have scouted throughout the year to see how it changes, and just collected folders and folders of images. And actually, I do this a lot with the sites that different times of day. Of course, where I'll go to scout something and I just come to someone and say, well, I know where the sun will be. And I have had sites where I'm like, you know what, I need to come back in 3 months because I know the sun's going to be a little further south than the sky is. And those who haven't been necessarily for a project or for a commission, or copy, I was just drawing. So I could choose a site and I could wait a year to draw it if I wanted. And I liked that aspect of the preliminary practice of really working with the environment. And there are times of year that I would, I'm just taking pictures all the time because of the quality of light. Like October is, it's just the quality of light. In February, we always get, there's 2 weeks in February that is really unique. It's just something about the air. And I know when it's a unique day too. There are days when I'm like, there's no studio work today, I'm just out scouting today because there's something about the air quality, either the density or what that it's going to have a quality of life that I like. So I might not be going to a specific site on those days, but I know that I can find something. This is what's interesting, it's like if you go on Monday at 4 o'clock to one corner and it looked one way, and a week later you go and it's going to look totally different. And that's kind of what I love about it has to be a happy sense. It sort of has to catch me as much as I'm keeping my eye out.
Do we have a question in the front?
Yes.
I'll come back to, I'll come back to, can you walk us through a typical collaborative session? You need to work together, does it take place in a room physically, or is it over a phone call, and if you have a disagreement about something, what might it be, and how you got over that? So, thank you.
Great question, Paul. I should take the first stab at that, yeah.
But we're not allowed to be in the same room anymore, right, because of the disagreements?
The violence.
I don't think we've ever actually had a disagreement, in that regard, because from the very beginning, the understanding was that this was neither of our shows.
Right.
And I think both of us had done a lot of work that we could take our egos out there and just really bring our expertise. And that might sound like I'm just passing off the line, but it was, I think we entered into it, it's like, this is what we're doing. We do this work, this is the role you're stepping into, and it's a collaborative thing. And actually it was quite refreshing for me, because I didn't have to make all these decisions.
Right.
And I needed my eye changed. So, typical, well, I think, let's talk about even the first 2 meetings. I think within 2 meetings, we had everything sorted. I came with a list of titles, you came with like 3 pages of possible, sites with locations. I came with places that I wanted to draw, and we just sat down and figured out, oh, we can do this one, we can do this one. We had a short list of titles. I think I did a couple mock-ups, and you did a few versions of length. And that was something too, how much text goes, we played with that, we played with layouts. And that was something that was great about these steps, was they really allowed some flexibility. I mean, I didn't design the pages, but I was able to say, oh, we want to do it, and do it this way, and if there was longer text than you needed, I would adjust the line. And yeah, it was just fun. We would show up with a list of places we were interested in, and we would say, all right, we'll pursue these 3 next.
Yeah, so it started out like, we did some things even on the phone. We had a list, and we'd go through our list, but then, well, we had a couple of great days that were like long driving around San Francisco, looking at things. That's when we were getting like thrown out of various places, trespassing into caught piers, and just finding all kinds of weird stuff. And that was super fun, because that was just like, Paul, I could see Paul getting excited about the visual possibilities of something. And, I'd be getting excited about all the stories and the historical stuff that we were finding. And yeah, and then, like I say, there were a few occasions, like the Caselli Mansion, where it didn't work out, and me not being an artist, was like, what? He's like, no, man, I can't do it, it doesn't have any shadows on it. So, but it was okay, because we ended up switching out the Haas Lily of the house, which Paul did a really stunning drawing of. And so, whenever something went down, and it wasn't that often that it did go down, we would just plug in something else. It was kind of like, it's a rich cornucopia of stuff that we if we could have done this for forever, we probably would never have run out of things to do. So, so the process was very collaborative. There was field work, phone calls, emails, just, and lining it up. And then once we decide to do something, often we would not meet, Paul would go out and do his scouting and his reference photos and start doing the drawings, and I would go and, start doing the research and write it, and towards the end, he'd send me a rough sketch often, I'd send him like my draft, and that was almost as a courtesy as much as anything else. I think you actually, it was probably more useful for you perhaps, because for me, like I always loved to see the art, but it wasn't really that much out of the writing. That what changed the writing was more like he was scouting and then he was actually showing things. Once we decided on something, seeing the art didn't affect my writing that much, but I think it was useful for you to have that deeper historical background on things.
Yeah, because then I could sort of shift my focus and say, well, what is the dominant element in here? Because even though I'm responding on formal elements, I didn't want to focus on one side part if you were actually focusing.
Right.
There was something historical. There is one quick story I want to tell about the first time I invited Gary to my studio. I was working on a drawing of Lombard Street. And one of the things that I was doing was I was trying to do as many of the icons as possible, because I hadn't done any of that in All Over Coffee. And I think that, and the reason is because when you draw something that's iconic, or piece or anything, what we see first is that subject matter beyond the style or beyond anything else. And so the challenge I set out for myself was, how do I do this in a way that really getting photographs that are being taken today aren't doing? And so I had this drawing, it was pretty big, it was a 3-foot drawing, 4-foot drawing of Lombard Street that I took a really interesting approach on. And Gary walked in, and he comes to a building, like in the top, way like in the distance, and he just starts telling me a story about the building that's in the drawing. And I realized, yeah, I could spend 2 months and not get that cool of a story. But he's just got it in his head, and all he has to do is walk up and see it, and I knew that that's when it would be so perfect, because we could drive around and Gary would be like, oh, let me tell you about that, let me tell you about that, let me tell you about that.
And by the same token, when I saw that insanely brilliant drawing, which is in this book, I believe, it's like a fisheye lens looking up at the curvy street from the bottom. It's not a view that the human eye would reproduce. I call it an ant on acid view. When I saw this, I was like, yeah, we gotta work together. That sealed the deal. And I think this lady had a question here.
Yes. First of all, I want to say how glad I am that you recovered so completely from that terrible accident. The article said that fortunately your drawing hand was not affected.
This is true.
You recovered, you know the drawing hand works. And I have your beautiful books, and I've seen your designs in different streets in San Francisco. Yes, in cafes,
Oh,
in
yes,
malls,
Yeah,
it's wonderful. And I want to tell you, I love them. Both of you obviously love San Francisco so much, and of course I share that too. But I read a long time ago that you guided people in hikes in San Francisco, and I wanted to know you're still doing that.
yes, I'm still giving walking tours.
Oh, I'd like to
Go to my
join you.
website, GaryKamiya.com. You can find my email address.
Okay.
Gary.Kamiya.
And I have both your books except the ones detective, Gilbert. But the thing is, I end up giving them to my friends.
Oh,
Yes.
we like it.
And I know the value of this great friendship. This is something really remarkable.
No, thank you. Well, we appreciate each other, which is a great thing.
And I want to get one of your books.
They're available. So I think with that, we're going to say a great big thank you to Paul Madonna. Go over, check out the books, buy 1, 2, or 3. And Gary and Paul will be here to sign the books. So thank you for coming, and come back next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.